be a relatively short video. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. And the reason that I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about the different ways that sociologists approach studying success or excellence, which is the focus of this week, is that both of the readings I think are very accessible. So what you're going to be doing this week is reading, and this is what the in-class writing is based on. The in-class writing is actually based almost completely on the Mundanity of Excellence, but you'll need to compare it to Outliers. So in Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell puts forward one understanding of how you could approach excellence or success from a sociological perspective. And then in Mundanity of Excellence, you're going to read an article from a sociologist who I believe is still at Hamilton College, which is about 2 hours from here. And I think it's one of the better examinations of why success occurs, or why there's a hierarchy of success that occurs, right? So you've got these two different articles, or one article and a few chapters. Read them both. I think they both make sense, but I want to provide you a little bit of an overview to get you going. So when you're studying success and excellence from a sociological perspective, the key thing is, in society, we like to focus on the individual. Why did a person succeed? Well, there was something special about them. Let's focus on what they did. Let's read the profile in the New York Times or in ESPN or whatever other source, and what they're going to do is say, well, this is why they were so motivated from the time that they grew up, and we knew they were special then, and then they worked really hard in college, and then they worked really hard after, and they're more determined than everyone else, and they're more talented than everyone else. All those things are at the individual focus, or focus at the individual level, right? In sociology, you understand everything else around it, everything else that helps us understand how that one individual succeeded. We don't want to take away credit from the individual. We don't want to take away the value of looking at the individual, but what we want to say is, well, if you really want to understand the story, everything else surrounding the individual is just as important, if not more important. Now, in doing so, there's two ways to look at success. One is from a quantitative perspective, and another is from a qualitative perspective. Quantitative focusing more on numbers, qualitative thinking more about these certain qualities, these certain characteristics that could help answer this question. Now, it's interesting because if you go to a bookstore, a physical bookstore, and you go to buy Outliers, and you can even see this if you have a physical copy of the book and you look at the back, it's going to list where it should be located in the bookstore, and it lists two things, psychology and self-help. It's kind of interesting because Outliers is not really either. It's not psychology. It's definitely coming from more sociological studies, a few psychological studies, but most of the research is from sociology. And then is it self-help? It is, in a sense, in the same way as a sociological imagination is self-help, because it helps you understand the various forces that explain, that shape the opportunities that you have, right? So it's self-help in that it gives you understanding, but it's not self-help in the classic sense where it focuses your attention completely inwards. Now, in Outliers, you're going to see Malcolm Gladwell introduce us to the 10,000-hour rule. This rule became incredibly popular after Gladwell looking at a study of violin players that social psychologists conducted, I believe in the 80s or early 90s, and he looked at this study of violin players and he wrote it up in Outliers, and it became a very popular concept. Now you hear the idea of the 10,000-hour rule over and over and over. 10,000-hour rule is pretty simple, right? It's just saying if you look at anyone who's achieved mastery, not being good, not being okay, not being pretty good, but mastery in their field, they must have at least put in 10,000 hours. You are not going to find someone who is at the top of their field, who has achieved mastery, who's only put in 2,000 hours. There's always going to be a tremendous amount of work that has gone into reaching this level. It also doesn't mean that everyone who puts 10,000 hours into something has mastered it, right? You could put 10,000 hours into something and just be doing a poor job when you're putting those hours in. Or I could put 10,000 hours into basketball, and I still probably won't be a professional basketball player because, one, probably not tall enough. Two, I started way too late, right? If I'm starting now, by the time I get my 10,000 hours in, it's going to be too late for me. So it doesn't mean that it's automatic, but it means if you find someone who's achieved mastery, look at the amount of time they put into it, they've put in 10,000 hours. Now, that is a lot of time, right? 10,000 hours is not a small amount. So if you divide 10,000 hours by 24, you'll see how many just straight days it would take to get this in. Now, I'm not going to walk you through every little aspect of the chapter because, again, Malcolm Gladwell writes in a way that's understandable, but I want you to pay attention to a few things while you're reading this chapter. Right? He's going to work you through a few different examples of people or groups who have achieved mastery, and he's going to tell you their story. So, first thing, when you're thinking about the 10,000 hour rule, which is a quantitative understanding of success, it's telling us something about the relationship between talent and opportunity. Gladwell is not dismissing talent. He is not saying talent does not matter. But what he's saying is talent has to be combined with opportunity to achieve mastery. So that's the first thing to think about. What is that relationship and why and how does he build that argument? Second thing to think about. He is telling us that timing matters and geography matters. Timing, in the sense, is the historical period in which you are born matters a great deal for success. Matters a great deal for success from the perspective of the 10,000 hour rule, or from a quantitative perspective. Equally important, and perhaps even more important, geography matters. Where you're born, where you're located. You could take Bill Gates, and if he were, and you could say that he has incredible inherent talent for understanding technology. If he were born in rural Idaho and had no access to machines, had no access to classrooms that could teach him this stuff, especially because at the time there wasn't like he had access to the internet, he would not be the Bill Gates that we know today, right? So geography always matters. Is it all about luck? That could be one way to interpret this. I'll let you answer that yourself. Does it seem like Gladwell is just telling us it's about luck? Think that through and try to think about why you would say yes or no. The other thing that's really key, and this is a very important takeaway, the 10,000 hour rule tells us a great deal about the relationship between success and social class. We could use the example of the violin again. What would you need to get up to 10,000 hours with a violin? Well, first of all, you'd have to start at a very young age. So that means you'd have to come from a background where someone in your life would suggest that you start playing the violin at a young age. Already telling us something about social class, right? The associations we have with the instrument, who actually plays it. So that's the first thing. What else do you need? Well, you need access to a teacher. Violin is not often an instrument that you can get in public school as your instrument that you learn. And even if you can, you're not going to get 10,000 hours of training at the public school, right? It's a limited amount. So you need to have someone who can teach you. So there we can see the importance of social class because you have to pay that person. You also need to be able to get to those lessons. So how do you get there? Does the person who's raising you have a car? Do they have time to take you to and from lessons? What else do you need? Well, you need the instrument. You need the violin. Violins are incredibly expensive, right? So think about all these things that you need. You need the right geographic location. You need parents with the resources to get you a violin. You need the parents with the resources to get you to and from lessons. And you just need to be motivated to actually do it, right? So there's all these ways that if you want to understand success and you want to understand the relationship to social class, even if it's not simply straight about the money, there's other ways, right? It's about what do you have access to? How much time do you have? If you have to get a job when you're 13 years old, then that takes away from your time working towards 10,000 hours, right? So class is part of this story as well. Now, the thing that we always have to ask ourselves whenever we read any research like this is how generalizable is it, right? Thinking back to methods, this is an important concept. This was based on a study of violin players in a music school. This is already narrowing it down. Is mastery in violin the same as mastery of technology? Is it the same as mastery of a sport? Is it the same as mastery of poetry? Right? Those are all different things. However, it's still telling us something very important about how you get to that level of success. Next thing you're going to look at is this article by Daniel Chambliss. Take more time with this article than the Outliers reading. It's denser, and I think it's also better, to be honest. Right? This is another take on the question of success. This is what the in-class writing will be based on. The in-class writing is already on Blackboard, and you can fill it out as you work through the reading. And I try to give you on Blackboard. I often give you hints for what page to look at to find the answer. Now, what Chambliss is doing, and I'll even give you an answer right now, is he's conducting an ethnographic study of swimmers. In ethnography, if you remember, is where you observe people in their natural setting. So he doesn't simply give swimmers a survey to fill out. He doesn't simply interview them. He actually goes with the swimmers and he observes how they train, how they eat, travel with them to a swim meet, right? He spends time, and what he wants to do is get an understanding of why some swimmers compete at the national level, others at the international level, some at Division 1, some at Division 2, some at Division 3, some at just local, right? There's all these different levels. Why is it that some are at level 1, others at level 2, others at level 3? That's what he's trying to understand. He is going to provide us an example of a qualitative explanation for success. Not quantitative like the 10,000 hour rule, but qualitative. As you work through, one of the terms I want to make sure you understand is the term stratification. Stratification simply means the arrangement or classification of something into different groups. It comes from the term is geological in origin, looking at the strata in rock. So this is a picture of a rock wall. If you did an undercut of the earth, you would see all these different levels, right? You would have different mineral deposits, different formations in each level. This is the strata of the earth. You could also have the strata of the stratosphere, our atmosphere, right? At different levels, there's different amounts of different types of gases and different density of those gases, right? So that is what we mean by strata. When he's looking at swimmers, he's looking at the stratification of swimmers. You could also do it in other areas. There's stratification that occurs in college and grades, right? We divide students into strata, A, B, C, D. That's strata. There's clear breaks between each group. You can be an A student who has a 99, and you can be an A student who has a 91, but you're both considered A students. Then you have that jump into B students. 89 and 91 are so close to each other, but suddenly you're in a different strata, right? So how do we explain that stratification? So work through the reading, work through the answers, and then the final thing I want you to think about, I'm not making you actually write this as an answer, but are these two explanations of success, we got the quantitative 10,000 hour rule and the qualitative mundanity of success, are they compatible, or are they so different that one has to be right and the other has to be wrong? So I want you to think about that, because generally in research, this is what happens. We all put forward our best attempt at understanding something. I could argue about why something works from a completely different angle from a different person. Sometimes those are so oppositional that one of us has to be wrong. Oftentimes we're just approaching it and getting different little pieces of the puzzle until eventually we have the whole picture. So think about which this is a case of. I'm going to end there. Could get into an example of Steph Curry, a basketball example of Steph Curry from the Warriors. Pretty clearly the greatest shooter of all time at this point. And then LeBron James, top 3 basketball player of all time, and think about which rule would actually help us understand them more. But if you're a fan of basketball, maybe you can think through that, but I'm not going to require or work through that example for everyone in the class. So hopefully this made sense. Again, as always, email me if you have any questions.